In 1968, for a strange number of reasons, I probably deserved a longer video anyway, the Memphis State University decided that although I had a National Merit Scholarship and almost straight A's, I just always seem to forget to wear my shoes with my ROTC uniform, that I should find another school. They said they would give me a nice recommendation if I would leave. And I decided to go to the new school for social research in New York, in the West Village, where had I gone, I would have met my hero Namjoon Pike, of whom I knew nothing at the time, and maybe the struggling young artist who would become one of the richest women in the world by marrying John Lennon. And I also applied to Roosevelt University. I always hope I can find a copy of this. It's not an excellent book. The other school to which I applied was Roosevelt University in Chicago. And as I say, I don't quite understand the reasons for anything that I do, but I went to Chicago to Roosevelt. And one of the big advantages of Roosevelt was it had a marvelous architectural history professor. I cannot remember his name. Professor Fargre, we'll call him. And he took us on the wonderful tours that were possible of architecture in Chicago that are hard to do anywhere else. I mean, one of the nice things about Roosevelt, it was right downtown in the center of things, in one of the most important historical buildings in Chicago, Adler and Sullivan's Auditorium Theater. Roosevelt was also a cool place to study art history, as it was just across the street from the Art Institute of Chicago. In fact, my art history professor, Don Baum, a wonderful teacher, himself owned a Frank Lloyd Wright house, and he would invite us over for dinner sometimes. But Professor Fargre built his own house, and he had us out for lunch one day. It was kind of a wooden building, a carpenter architecture version of Mises' more famous house, built for his sometimes lover, perhaps, the Farnsworth house. And as I say, it was a wonderful place to study architecture. But Professor Fargre's son, Torvqld, was also interested in architecture and wrote this book, which is not so much about the steel frame or highest ever brick skyscraper or the like that one finds in big cities, but in the architecture of nomads. And nomadic architecture has remained an interest of mine, and tents have remained an interest of mine, oh gosh and golly, since I was a wee lad. And growing up in the days after World War II, when one could buy for, I don't know, maybe $2, a magnificent pup tent made of smelly, impregnated canvas. It wasn't sexual, it was soaked in wax. pup tents or huge wall tents. We had several of both, a couple of pup tents, and one of which I would carry on my early excursions into the nearby woods, and a big wall tent that we would take on major hunting and fishing trips. And then later in life, when I became sometimes nomad, I mean, I just make a video about the influence of walking and Bruce Chatwin on my life someday. I would spend a lot of time living in tents, and from time to time, even when I was more or less settled in some place, I would choose to live in a tent. Often it would happen that I would land in some place and think, well, I have a friend who let me pitch in her backyard for a few weeks or a few days while I find a real place to live. And I have been fortunate to have friends who have extensive backyards. And sometimes I have enjoyed living in a tent for several years. I remember one particular very cold winter, and I was living in the backyard. I mean, it was 4 acres, I think, that my friend Edie owned, and it was very cold. And I heard her clomping through the snow up to her knees. Delightful woman. She now lives in Missouri. And she had come to see if I was alive, and if I were alive, she had brought me hot biscuits. And she said, "Are you awake?" And I said, "Just a minute, let me put on some clothes," because I was sitting in my underwear, because it is very easy to heat a tent. And my little stove that I used to make coffee, I've forgotten how much wonderful material there is in this book. Would make it just toasty. So I threw on some clothes and turned off the stove and invited her in, and we had coffee and biscuits, all nice and cozy, while outside the temperature was, I don't know, 3 degrees Celsius, 3 degrees centigrade, maybe 3 degrees Fahrenheit. All these different ways of measurements can sometimes cause problems. Just ask one of the moon missions. Anyway, I had recently given away 2 tents, one to a homeless person I met in Bellingham, and another one to some young kids who I thought needed to have the opportunity to pitch a tent in their backyard. And it made me realize I need to buy myself a new tent. You see, I mean, tents can be, although they're often made of simple materials, they can be just as provocative, just as evocative in their architecture as a place like, Hagia Sophia, which has a somewhat similar understanding of building and universe. Anyway, as I say, I gave the tent away. Made me realize, in fact, I'm going to order it any minute now. I need to own a tent just to feel comfortable, and I'm going to order from Walmart the same kind of tent that I gave away. Oddly enough, over the years, I have owned expensive tents and cheap tents, and lately I have found that in terms of bang for buck, one really just can't beat Ozark Trails tents. They have a number of little details that are kind of nicer than. You see, here we have Hagia Sophia again. am not comparing these tents to St. Peter's because I think St. Peter's is an ugly building. They often have a number of details that are nicer than more expensive tents, and over the years I've bought several iterations of basically the same design, and I find that they have gotten better and better over the years. Well, you know, this is a big old book with, I'm 8.5 by 11, with nice print and paper, even is a library copy, and a marvelous bibliography. Remember bibliographies instead of videographies. This is a tent from the old days. In fact, if I were not so addicted to my electronics, I might find myself living in a tent again. I was able to charge all my electronics with a solar generator, tiny solar panel, when I was living in that tent I mentioned in the 4-acre backyard. Maybe I could do it again. Yes, well, I mean, the tin can is nice, but I have to have an electric heater for it. And I found that 3 candles would be sufficient for the coldest night when I was in a tent. Well, I would be delighted if you guys would like this video and subscribe to see more various sort of things. I've always thought I would live in a yurt, but I never have. And tell me what your experience is. Speaking of yurts, there is kind of one being built even now. Yeah. I'll put a link to the video channel all about nomadic living as well. I'd be happy to hear of your experience as a tent dweller or a nomad, and I guess in my 70s I probably won't be making many other great journeys, but well, one of the nice things about being old is one has a lot more memories to scroll through than ever before. And the nice thing about memories is that there are almost never any mosquitoes or snakes in them. Well, thanks for watching.